Hey everyone. So I just watched the season 4 premiere of Dark Side of the Ring on Chris Candido and Tammy Lynn Sytch, aka Sunny from WWE and Skip from WWE, but mostly famously known as Chris Candido and Tammy Lynn Sytch. And I would have to say it was a good, decent season premiere. They covered some things that we may or may have not known about and stuff. You know, and they also didn't cover some things we knew about, but they didn't talk about. They basically decided to skip over it, I guess, because it didn't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things, which is kind of surprising. But they did cover how Chris basically loved wrestling, and one of the things he would do when he was around 13, 14 years old would go with his friend uh, on a train or across town, if you will, to, I guess you could say, a bar in Brooklyn or in the Brooklyn area or somewhere, and put on a wrestling show along with their other friends. Because what he did is he created this wrestling federation for kids. I think it was like Eastern or Extreme Kids Wrestling Federation or something. But he created it with his friend, and the way he and his friend would basically, do this is they would tell their moms, "Oh, I'm going to be over at Chris's house, you know, for the night for the for a Friday night, Saturday night sleepover," and Chris would then tell his mom, "Oh, I'll be over at my friend's house for that as well." Not not being basically not being honest with either of the moms, and basically revealing, yeah, we're actually going to go to Brooklyn and wrestle, and then we're going to come back and stay at the other's house, just so it doesn't look like we wrestled or anything like that, or we went elsewhere. And they interviewed Chris's mom. Her name was Peggy, and she basically said that if she had known that he was doing that, she wouldn't have allowed him to do it. She would have said, "No, I'm not going to let you do that. You're not doing that." Or if she had known he was lying to her, she would pretty much, I would assume, basically say, "Hey, I know what you're planning to do. You ain't going to your friends. You're staying here." So, in other words, she basically said if she would have known, she would have done it. The only person that knew he was doing it was his brother, Johnny Ray, with Johnny Candido. I think he was a wrestler too. But yeah, Johnny Ray. And yeah, Johnny basically, I think that's what his name was. Johnny saw a lot, when it came to Chris and Tammy's relationship. I think he lived with them or something, or would partially live with them or visit them or whatever. But he was around them a lot, from what he was saying. Now, it wasn't just Johnny, his brother or Peggy, his mom. They talked to. They talked to Jim Cornette. They talked to Lance Storm. They talked to Dr. Tom Pritchard, and yeah, they basically covered a lot of bases here, like how committed Chris was to being a wrestler. Like, for example, when he was a kid, he actually took a I guess you could say a silver platter from a wedding that was left over from a wedding, and put it onto an actual weight belt and turned it into a championship. And Johnny, who has that still, Johnny and his mom, who still have it, I should say, Johnny basically said, if you really look at it, it could pass as an actual championship even nowadays. They, excuse me, Johnny also took the crew, the Dark Side of the Ring crew, up to Chris's, I guess you could say, office, the basement. We had photos of Chris and everything. Had a fan up there for air conditioning. When I guess he would get humid, that Chris put up there, installed in there, and basically it's one of those dual fans, you will, that you put in your window or space somewhere in your house if you want some extra cooling. And he says and it's just like hanging up there in the like in a walkway area and entranceway area. And he's like, he's never taken it down since his brother's passed. And then he shows us other things, like there's a drawing. He believes his brother drew even before he was born and stuff like that. So anyway, long story short, Chris was very committed to wrestling, even to the point that after he got out of high school, he was doing independent stuff. And when he was doing independent stuff, that's when he met with Tammy and everything. He met with Tammy because his mom went to one of his matches, and she was in the row, and the guy he was in the ring with was telling him, "Hey, you see that girl over there? You see that girl over there?" And Chris locks eyes with her, and she obviously locks eyes with him. And the way Peggy described it, it was like, it was an angel, literally sitting there in the front row, the way she was, I guess, dressed up and stuff. And that's basically how that relationship between Tammy and Chris began, to the point that, according to his mom, Chris actually ditched his prom date that he took with him because, again, he was doing wrestling. I think he was doing wrestling. Well, he wasn't doing well. He was doing wrestling while he was still in high school, but he was, really doing it more out of high school and stuff like that. But anyway, she talks about the story where Chris ditches his actual prom date to go with Tammy, who drives up in this convertible or whatever it is, this Cadillac and everything, because he was that infatuated with her. He was that in love with her. And what happened is, after high school, when he was, doing more wrestling now that he was out of high school, he was wrestling on the independents, and he sent tapes to Jim Cornette, in Smoky Mountain, because he wanted to get some exposure. And Jim's looking at this, and he's like, "Oh, okay, there's something here, and all that." But then later on, after Chris gets signed, and his mom finds out about this and says, "Yeah, you can wrestle still, but you got to go to school first. You got to, go to college." Basically, she's telling him, "Yeah, you're not going to wrestle unless you're going to college." So Chris gets enrolled at University of Tennessee, the Volunteers. So it makes it easier for him to travel over to Knoxville, I'm assuming, which was the home base of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and meet up with Jim Cornette. Anyway, long story short, his mom sees him wrestling in a blue baby bonnet and stuff, and it's only then that Chris realizes, and I think by extension his mom and his brother are realizing, oh, there's more to wrestling than just, wrestling in the ring and the athleticism. You gotta develop a character. But it's also around this time that Jim finds out about Tammy, and Jim comes up with this great idea. Because around this time, I think they said it was like 93, 94, around that time, about 93, 94, maybe 95, but I would say a little earlier. But basically, it was around the time when the Clintons were the most hated couple in America if you were a Republican. And basically, long story short, Jim saw the opportunity to create, heat for a new character and to really just build off of that situation. So he brings Tammy in as a fan and advocate, if you will, for Hillary Clinton, and has her, read off this thing. Not read off it, but basically he gives her these bullet points, and says, do your best to convey it in a realistic standpoint or realistic way in your first interview. And she does. She gets up there, she's being given time to express her opinions. And then it's during this that she reveals she's going to sue Smoky Mountain Wrestling for, I don't know if it's domestic abuse or sexual abuse or something like that. Basically, in the storyline, she was going to sue them because of unequal opportunity for women. And anyway, it's from there to where she starts to blossom into the Tammy character that she'd become known for in Smoky Mountain. Basically, somebody that was, superior over those that she would manage, like Brian Lee and others. Anyway, during this time, Candido's racking up a lot of injuries, and the doctors are wondering, like, okay, how did you get these injuries and all that, and you know, and this is later on. They talk about this later on in the story when he goes to ECW. But basically, the doctors are wondering, how did you get these injuries? And Candido's like, I got these injuries by wrestling, because the way his injuries were described by the doctors, it looked like he was in a car accident. So anyway, before all that though, before that's revealed, he's injured. He's building up these injuries, but he goes to WWF. He gets the attention of WWF, him and Tammy, and that's when they debut as the Body Donnas, which they all agree was a ridiculous gimmick to give them. And then later on, bringing on Tom Pritchard, as the partner, and Tom even said it was the worst time of his life. But it was in WWF where things really started to, de-escalate, if you will, for both of them. In a way, like for Skip, it started to not Skip, but for Chris Candido, it started to de-escalate to the point that, as his star was falling, Tammy's was rising, and pretty much it became a situation to where they had to split up and everything, even to the point that even in front of Chris's own eyes, and Tammy has admitted this, she was having she was in a moment, she was having a thing with Shawn Michaels, who was the top guy in WWF at that time, and Chris, at one point, I guess it was at a party in a hotel or something like that, was being, taken out of the hotel by his brother, like, hey man, let's just get out of here. You don't need to see this. And Chris did not want to leave because he was that committed and in love with Tammy. He says, I brought her into this, basically going to his brother. Chris basically is like, I brought Tammy into this business. It's my responsibility to take care of her. I have to be here. And his brother's like, man, you don't have to be here. Just leave. Let's just go. But Chris didn't want to. So anyway, after a while, Chris, of course, as I mentioned, goes to ECW. And that's where he joins the Triple Threat faction. And it's also there where it's revealed, as I mentioned, that the doctors noticed that his injuries, that he accumulated wrestling are, equal that of, someone being in a car accident. And so he has to be sidelined for a while before he can get back in the ring. But the way he gets back in the ring is, again, he takes more drugs. He takes Somnus. I don't know if he took Somnus, in WWE. I think he took something else there, but he took Somnus here. So long story short, it really was a downfall for him. And Tammy's star, as much as it was rising in WWE, she was garnering a lot of heat with everybody in the back, to the point that they basically took the slop bucket of the Godwins and added more fluid and excrement to it, to the point that Tammy basically had to, obviously he gets showered, but it was not exactly the slop that Tammy was expecting to get, because people hated her. They just disliked her and everything, because her star was rising to the top. It was rising to the top and everything. So what happened mainly after that is Tammy, with the arrival of Sable ended up, her star, of course, we know, was rising, a lot higher and faster than Tammy's, to the point that Tammy basically saw the writing on the wall, and in 1999 joined Chris in ECW and became part of the Triple Threat. Now, what's interesting, like I said, is, it's here where, again, his injuries were revealed to be that of being in a car accident, but it's also where Tammy's fall from grace was, basically coming, full circle, starting to hit that mark of, something's